the Gita is distributed. Who would like to have a Gita for today's reading? So we'll begin from page 1, going over the invocation. Om Jnanatimirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. I was born in the darkest ignorance, and my spiritual master opened my eyes with a torch of knowledge. I offer my respectful obeisances unto him. Moving to page 2. Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasati Gaura Bhaktivinoda. I offer my obeisances to Shri Krishna Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, Prabhu Nityananda, Shri Advaita Gadadhar, Srivas, and all others in the line of devotion. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. So today is a two-part wisdom talk series, focusing on the Bhagavad Gita, where there are a pair of verses that go well together, and they have to do with how humans can come to a position where it leads to their own destruction, in one sense. It really takes one away from their true nature, and how do we correct course on that action? Because oftentimes when we think about any sort of object that is on the earth, is subjected to the earth's gravitational force. So similarly, the default position in this material world is there's three primarily qualities, which is the mode of goodness, the mode of passion, and the mode of darkness, as the Gita teaches us. So by default, because we can think about an object, so say I have this bottle and I drop it, it goes to the ground. So that's its default position. But if I want to elevate it, I have to use energy to elevate it. Similarly, when we are living entities in this world, it's very easy for us to be in the mode of darkness, because that's the default position. Mode of passion requires some effort, and usually people are willing to endeavor for that effort to wake up early in the morning and engage in some endeavor where they get some rewards for that. So there's a bit of an exchange, right? And then the mode of goodness is even higher than that, where it's more based on selfless service, where one still endeavors but does not have any expectation of result or a particular direction of their lively discourse. So the Bhagavad Gita clearly gives us, Krishna is the creator and the source of all the material and spiritual universes. So naturally, Krishna gives us directions on how to navigate through this whole life, as well as the life events that come with us. Just like if we were to go and visit an unknown place, right? A place that's very vastly unknown about it, but we find a person who, is very expert, maybe was in charge of, making all the roads and constructing all the houses and all the markets. We usually ask that person about directions on what to do, what are places to see, and so forth. Similarly, this universe has been constructed by the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Sri Krishna himself. So therefore, Krishna, God, gives us directions on how to navigate this life and navigate our life on in his creation. And we can either use our propensities and channel it in the right way, where we are not subjected to material misery, or we can we either have the choice of getting completely deluded or actually going and realizing who we are as spiritual beings. So we will move to chapter 2, verse I believe it's 62. So if you can turn to that. So that will be our first verse today, and then we'll talk about the second verse next week. So this is page 128 on the hardbound BBT edition of Bhagavad Gita as it is. So the verse goes like this: Dhyayato Vishayam Pumsaha Sangat Teshu Bhajayate Sangat Sanjayate Kamaha Kamata Krodho Vijayate. So if you can repeat after me: Dhyayato Vishayam Pumsaha
Dhyato Vishayam Pumsaha
Sangat Teju Bhajayate
Sangat Teju Prajayate
Sangat Sanjayate Kamaha
Sanjat Sanjayate Kamaha
Kamata Krodho Vijayate.
Kamata Krodho Vijayate.
Let's do that once again. Dhyayato Vishayam Pumsaha
Dhyato Vishayam Pumsaha
Sangat Teju Bhajayate
Sangat Teju Prajayate
Sangat Sanjayate Kamaha
Sangat Sanjayate Kamaha
Kamata Krodho Vijayate.
Kamata Krodho Vijayate.
Alright, thank you. So we'll also do the word for word translation, and you can also repeat after me after each Sanskrit and each translation. So, Dhyayata
Dhyayata
while contemplating, Visayan
Vishayan
sense objects,
sense object,
Pumsa
Pumsa
of a person,
Sangha
Sangha attachment,
Teshu
in the sense object, Pajayate develops, Sangha from attachment, Sanjayate develops, Kamaha desire, Kama from desire, Krodha anger, Abhijayate becomes manifest. Alright, thank you for reading that. So I'll go ahead with the translation and reading the purport. While contemplating the objects of the senses, a person develops attachment for them. And from such attachment, lust develops, and from lust, anger arises. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. One who is not Krishna conscious is subjected to material desires while contemplating the objects of the senses. The senses require real engagements, and if they are not engaged in the transcendental loving service of the Lord, they will certainly seek engagement in the service of materialism. In the material world, everyone, including Lord Shiva and Lord Brahma, to say nothing of the other demigods and the heavenly planets, is subjected to the influence of sense objects. And the only method to get out of this puzzle of material existence is to become Krishna conscious. Lord Shiva was in deep meditation, but when Parvati agitated him for sense pleasure, he agreed to the proposal, and as a result Kartikeya was born. When Haridasa Thakura was a young devotee of the Lord, he was similarly allured by the incarnation of Maya Devi, but Haridasa easily passed the test because of his unalloyed devotion to Lord Krishna. As illustrated in the above mentioned verse of Sri Yamunacharya, a sincere devotee of the Lord shuns all material sense enjoyment due to his higher taste for spiritual enjoyment in the association of the Lord. That is the secret of success. One who is not therefore in Krishna consciousness, however powerful he may be in controlling the senses by artificial repression, is sure ultimately to fail. For the slightest thought of sense pleasure will agitate him to gratify his desires. Hare Krishna. So here we see there's 4 parts in the translation where it's stated that while contemplating the objects of the senses, a person develops attachment for them. And from such attachment, lust develops, and from lust, anger arises. So this is something that we ourselves have experienced quite a bit. And this verse and the next verse, Lord Sri Krishna beautifully describes why are there problems in the world. In 2 simple verses, which is Bhagavad Gita, chapter 2, verse 62 and verse 63. Why is there conflicts in the world? Why are there problems? Why are there quarrels? Why is there scarcity, food scarcity? Why is there fighting over resources, fighting over land? People fighting amongst each other. It again comes back to this verse, Dhyayato Vishayam Pumsa. Because when the senses, which is the five senses which make up the primarily sensors of the body, perceiving sense objects, which means the objects of the senses means anything that the senses can perceive. And when they find that particular object attractive, they find that over time they develop some attachment. And from such attachment, we get intense material desire, which is also known as kama, lust. And then from that, anger arises. And anger arises mainly because when we are in absence of that particular sense object that we have developed such intense attachment and desire for, then naturally we become very, very angry and upset that we don't get it. So when we become angry, then the verse will explain next week, but when we have that sense of anger, it causes all sorts of quarrels, as well as conflicts, as well as a nature which is completely aspiritual. So it's important that when we look at this verse, we see that when we are contemplating the objects of the senses, we develop attachment, and from such attachments lust develops, and from lust anger arises. So it shows you a bit of a flow chart of what happens in life and how can we really avoid it. So we should really think about that, how we ourselves in our day-to-day being and life and experiences, that we shouldn't be falling for the trap that Krishna mentions, that when we contemplate the objects of the senses, all of a sudden we are going down that rabbit hole. Or it's like a slide. So if you think about, if you're at a water park or a playground, if you're on the top of the slide and going down into the water is a dangerous path to go on, it all begins with that little, push on the top, and then you have no control and you go all the way down. Similarly, dhyayato vishayam pumsaha. When one contemplates the objects of the senses with their own senses, that sort of begins that slide that goes down. So therefore, it's important for us to always keep that in check, and we always avoid that whenever we catch ourselves in that contemplation, we should shift our mind towards spiritual subject matter. And Prabhupada mentions in the purport that one who is not Krishna conscious is subjected to material desires while contemplating the object of the senses. So, let's unpack that a little bit. So here we see the one who is not Krishna conscious, which means one who does not live a regulated lifestyle. So I was just talking to, we were at an event in Lindsay, Ontario on Friday, and I was talking to a lady who is, more enlightened than the average public in Canada, and she mentioned that real freedom comes from within when one lives a life of regulation. Otherwise, that's real freedom. Otherwise, freedom, when we think of, I want to do anything I want to do. I want to enjoy what I want to do. I want to go wherever I want to do. That's not real freedom, because ultimately you will become a slave of your senses. So the seers of truth, the rishis, the acharyas, the holy teachers, spiritual masters, Srila Prabhupada himself, our founder acharya, has warned us, saying that real freedom lies within a person who lives a very regulated life. And in doing so, we are the bosses of our mind, and not that our mind becomes our bosses. And that's a very important point. So when Prabhupada says, the one who is not Krishna conscious is subjected to material desires with contemplating the object of the senses. So one who has that training as a Krishna conscious practitioner knows how to perceive things and how to engage in using and looking at this world in a Krishna conscious perspective. But a person who doesn't have that training will naturally look at things in this material world as an object for their own enjoyment. I am the Lord of all I serve. Aham Ishwar, Aham Bhogi. I am the Lord of whatever area or place I survey, and I am the enjoyer. Instead of I am the servitor of the Lord, and I am meant to serve the Lord. Right? So that is a Krishna conscious take or perspective on that very same sense object. So Prabhupada goes on to say the senses require real engagements, and if they're not engaged in the transcendental loving service of the Lord, they will certainly seek engagement in the service of materialism. So here it says that when one can protest and say that, you bhakti yogi, Krishna conscious people say that the nature of the soul is to worship and serve Krishna. But I don't want to worship and serve Krishna. It's too difficult or it's too inconvenient. But then either we serve Krishna or we serve the material energy, Maya. So there's no sense of getting out of service. We either serve the Lord or we serve the material energy. But when we serve the material energy, it's a bad master because it's always bound to disappoint us. So therefore, the original spiritual master, the original teacher, Krishna is teaching us in the Gita that ultimately we must engage our life and our very being in the service of the Lord. And when doing so, you live such a simple life that whatever you need for your basic sustenance is always provided by Krishna's grace. So we must have that, faith that whether Krishna embraces us tightly or roughly, that we must still go on with being steadfast and focused on Krishna, because he's the ultimate source of all love and ultimate source of all happiness. And being in the mode of goodness and trying to transcend the material mode of goodness requires effort. Just like, gravity pulls us down, well, it requires energy for us to, pull ourselves up from certain situations. So therefore, it's very important that we always endeavor and always engage in effort. Because when we always engage in that, we're always battling the material energy. Because the material energy tends to get us down, whether it's impersonalism or it's laziness, or it is being very lethargic, or it is quarreling with one another, or it's gossip. All these things do not bring us closer to Krishna, it takes us further and further away. So here's what's meant by, if we have nothing else to do, we'll seek the service and the engagement of materialism. And very much Krishna consciousness is the path of positive engagement. It's not simply negation where you don't do anything. Sometimes, there are some spiritualists out there who say that, well, we'll, reduce the amount of food we eat, we will stop talking, we will stop engaging in any sort of worldly affairs, and they think that is being spiritual. But Prabhupada's engagement and also the Vaishnava theological perspective on that is to engage the senses in the service of the Lord. So dhyayato vishayam pumsaha, when one sees that, okay, I come to the temple, I engage my eyes in seeing the deity of the Lord, I engage my ears in hearing the messages of the Lord, or hearing kirtan or glorification of Krishna. I engage my sense of smell in smelling the flowers or incense that are offered to Krishna. I engage my sense of touch by actually, getting into serving Krishna, and taste and tongue in terms of glorifying Krishna and also tasting foods that are offered to Krishna. So in this way, we engage the senses in the transcendental loving service of the Lord. And by doing so, we keep our life regulated to the point where we are not subjected to all sorts of material desires which keep on hounding us throughout the day, throughout the week, throughout the year. And it never leads to a permanent state of satisfaction. There's always going to be flickering and fleeting happiness, which doesn't really give us true satisfaction of the self. So we are happiness-seeking beings, and true enjoyment lies when we engage in service. And then Prabhupada goes on to explain that in the material world, everyone, including great personalities like Lord Shiva and Lord Brahma, not to say of the other demigods like Indra and Chandra, the moon god and the sun god, and the god of heaven, Lord Indra, and so forth, they are also subjected to the influence of sense objects. So this applies to all of us. So all of us, this verse, chapter 2, verse 62 we're talking about, it applies to each and every one of us, and we have to always be on guard against, going down this slide to the ocean of birth and death, if you will. So the only method Prabhupada says is to get out of this puzzle of material existence is to become Krishna conscious. So when one lives a regulated life according to the directions of the creator of this universe, then one can truly experience true happiness and being a master of their destiny instead of just being, being subjected to the ill thoughts of the mind. So then Prabhupada also mentions an example of Haridas Thakur, who was born in a Muslim family, and Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, because of his immense compassion, accepted him as Namacharya, which is the holy teacher of the holy name. And he would always be engaged in chanting the Hare Krishna mantra, and then there was some the kings conspired saying, okay, let's go and test this Haridas. So when Haridas was tested, he passed the test mainly because he was attracted to Krishna's holy name. So by that attraction to Krishna, you automatically detracted from materialism and material energy. Because to simply artificially say no to materialism, one is bound to just come back to their own bad habits. So therefore, it's very important that by attraction to Krishna, dhyayato vishayam pumsaha, instead of sense objects, I get attracted to Krishna conscious things, and naturally get detracted from materialism. So that's what's said here, that one who shuns all material sense enjoyment due to his higher taste for spiritual enjoyment in the association of the Lord. That is the secret of success. So here one may say that, well, by living a regulated life, I don't see where's the enjoyment in that. Do you people actually enjoy life? Are you guys miserable? Are you going through, torturing yourself by waking up early in the morning and performing these austerities and chanting and observing a regulated diet, regulated thoughts, regulated activities? It seems regulated. But Prabhupada here says that one does get a higher taste for spiritual enjoyment in the association of the Lord. So if you think about it, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Shri Krishna, is the source of all love and happiness. The source of all love and happiness is not any material object of this world. So therefore, knowing Krishna is permanent and Krishna is the source of everything, knowing that we as part and parcel of Krishna are also permanent, and what connects us is service, then we must think about how we engage ourselves in the service of Krishna. And in doing so, it yields us much better and longer lasting satisfaction. Otherwise, if one were to just engage in, okay, my senses like to do this, so let me just do it because it's enjoyable, well, that happiness is just so flickering and temporary, it'll go away. And in order for you to again gain that happiness again and again, you have to always engage in those types of sensory activities. And it never yields to permanent satisfaction. It always leads to misery. And maybe as a raise of hands, has anyone found that in their experience, that if you're just enjoying a certain object, the happiness is very temporary. Let's say if you eat an ice cream, or you have various, maybe the weather is nice, but it's temporary. Who agrees with that? That's a temporary reality. Yeah. Chewing the chew, yeah. So that's, I guess an example of that is like sugar cane, or chewing gum is probably more popular in the West, but maybe in more tropical countries it's sugar cane. So you take some sugar cane and you chew it, and then you get some sweet juice out of it. But after a while, you keep on chewing it, and there's no sweet juice. And some of our spiritual teachers in our Krishna consciousness, they mentioned that a camel is biting a cactus. But a cactus, what does a cactus have? Thorns. So the thorns, it pierces the tongue of the camel, and it causes him to bleed. So he's only just, chewing the blood. It's kind of a gross example. And he's just tasting the blood, right? So actually the cactus is not delicious at all. So similarly, the type of happiness that I mentioned that's very temporary, engaged in material energy, it's only temporary at best, and it's like chewing the chew. We're trying to find more happiness, and until our bodies become older and we can't enjoy that as much anymore, and then we have to face renunciation anyway, right? So it's better whatever stage and age of life we're in, whether we are young, we're old, we're in a Western country, we're in a tropical country, we're in the East. It all doesn't matter. We just have to see to it that how do we mold our life in such a way that it is Krishna related and Krishna centric. And in doing so, whether it's our home, whether it is our routine, our daily routine, our weekly routine, maybe once a year we may think about intensely engaging in spiritual practices or going to spiritual places. All of these things are really, really good and positive for us because it elevates our consciousness. And that's what the world really needs, is elevation of consciousness. When we elevate the consciousness, naturally there's more peacefulness, there is more sense of regulated activities, and that leads to better happiness. Krishna mentions in the Gita. The one who's peaceful inside first can taste a higher sense of happiness. Without peacefulness, there is no happiness. But when we think that, okay, this is my land, and this is my kingdom, and this is my, I'm meant to exploit these people, we naturally find a lot of conflicts. Whether we see the wars that are currently happening in the world, they're all because of dhyato vishayam pumsa. When you think that this is my land or this is my property and let's kill each other. It's very unfortunate that we have so many lives that are lost because of, again, coming to this principle of when contemplating the objects of the senses. So therefore Prabhupada mentions the secret of success is that he's given us a very simple and easy process by simply engaging our body, mind, and intelligence in the service of the Lord as much as possible. To be 10% Krishna conscious is to do this all the time, but it's not easy for people who are so conditioned like us to always flip that switch. But think of it as like a rotating switch, like if you see a fan and you're trying to adjust the speed of the fan. Similarly, think of ourselves that we are a work in progress in bhakti yoga and spiritual practice, and we're trying to dial that fan to reduce the amount of materially motivated activities, materially motivated thoughts, to spiritually motivated activities and spiritually motivated thoughts. And when doing so, you yourself can experience a higher sense of purpose and happiness. A lot of people these days suffer from, anxiety or depression or loneliness. And our Acharya, Srila Prabhupada, is so kind. He has, typically sadhus don't really leave India after a certain age. Okay, they'll be in a holy place, they'll retire, Swamiji, what are you doing? 69, 70 years old, going to a foreign country where, there's people who may not appreciate your message, or they eat lots of meat and all that. How is this going to happen? You can be here comfortable in Vrindavan and live the rest of your life. But Prabhupada came out of his deep, immense compassion, bringing Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's mood, who's a saint of bringing all this kirtan culture to the world, and really gave us ISKCON, the institution, gave us Bhakti Yoga, the process, and gave us this association where we can come together with devotees. So the sense of fellowship, is there, which combats loneliness. Mantra meditation combats anxiety. Kirtan combats anxiety, right? So we can combat these things of loneliness or depression or anxiety when we engage ourselves in the service of the Lord, as given by Srila Prabhupada, who gives us this prescription of Bhakti Yoga. So then Prabhupada mentions in the last sentence, one who is not, therefore, in Krishna consciousness, however powerful he may be in controlling the senses by artificial repression, is sure ultimately to fail. For the slightest thought of sense pleasure will agitate him to gratify his desires. So here we see Prabhupada gives us a big warning that those of us who are not having our life regulated in accordance to Krishna's direction, however powerful one can be in just repressing your controlling the senses simply by repression meaning that, okay, well, the whole world is full of enjoyment, so I'm going to live in a very secluded place and very meticulously avoid certain activities. And I believe from the Bhagavatam, there's a story of a father who wanted to protect his son to be completely like celibate for life. And once the father was away, and then there was, he never saw women ever, right? So as soon as he saw women, it's like, okay, this is a very strange thing, right? So when living in such a controlled environment, or maybe if you're not around wealth and you see wealth all of a sudden, you're like, oh, what is this wealth and comfort and so forth. So you tend to swing back to that, okay, let's engage, this is something new, I like these type of comforts, I like this type of luxury. But that swinging back means you completely lost out on any progress you made. We want to always, step by step, progressively make progress in whatever we do. So similarly, in spiritual life, we must also try and endeavor to make progress step by step. So you can completely erase that progress when you have no particular attraction for the Supreme Person. So that's why when Prabhupada talks about Krishna consciousness, that we're conscious of Krishna in so many different ways and so many different forms, that when we engage all of our body and senses, our subtle body, mind, intelligence, and ego, in the service of the Lord, then automatically we live a life where it is based on a balanced and exemplary lifestyle that leads us to a higher sense of happiness. And that is what's mentioned here. So again, dhyayato vishayam pumsaha sangas teju pajayate sangat sanjayate kamaha kamat krodho vijayate. So when contemplating on the objects of the senses, one develops attachment from them. From such attachment, lust develops, point number 3. Point number 4, from lust, anger arises. So we can see Krishna is giving us this natural flow chart in which he warns us that if you don't want to go down this slide which leads you to the ocean of birth and death, it begins with dhyayato vishayam pumsaha. And sometimes you can just catch the railing and be like, nope, I'm not going down that slide. So similarly, Krishna is warning us, and Prabhupada is telling us that by engaging our engagement in a higher engagement in the service of the Lord, we have a higher taste. And when we have that higher taste, we naturally do not have the taste for lower base desires. That kind of goes away. So naturally, when you have a higher taste, automatically you will reject things that are very materially motivated or based on petty material desires. You reject it because you're like, no, I'm good. And that's the situation where we want to find ourselves. Where we find happiness through engaging in activities in service, and in doing so, we are so engaged in the activities of service that automatically the material energy and allurements kind of stay at bay. Otherwise, our minds are always being bombarded with all sorts of activities or experiences or people that distract us away from that which is permanent, which is Krishna, ourselves, the soul, and the process that relates us in Krishna, which is bhakti, yoga, and that is described to be the nitya dharma of the jiva, which means the permanent occupation of the living entity is to be engaged in service. And I mentioned earlier that one can question that, well, engaged in the service of the Lord. Well, if you're not engaged in the service of the Lord, you'll be engaged in the service of materialism. And that, we see that it doesn't provide true satisfaction. An example is like it's the last day of March. So it's, next month is typically when all the taxes are due. So this is one way of where we engage in the service of the government, but we find that simply serving the government doesn't give us true satisfaction. So but when we engage whatever wealth and resources and time and energy we have in the service of Krishna in whatever way that we find is sustainable to our lives, in that we will find true satisfaction. Alright? Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
So we'll take some time for some questions or reflections based on this verse, which is, while contemplating the optical senses, a person develops an attachment for them. From such attachment, lust develops, and from lust, anger arises. And this is Krishna being the source of everything, being the ultimate creator, sustainer, and destroyer of the manifested universes. He knows what causes issues and conflicts. And Krishna is beautifully mentioned, Dhyayato Vishayam Pumsaha. So if anybody were to ask you, why are there problems in this world? It's because of this personality or this type of, this ism, that ism. A simple answer is Dhyayato Vishayam Pumsaha. When one engages in the activities of senses and sense enjoyment, that leads to misery amongst, living entities. So, Hare Krishna. Any questions? Yes, question in the back.
I totally embrace this teaching.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
However, a question to you, and
Okay, sure.
copying on your wisdom here. Without contemplating this Vishayan, not in the lustful sense,
Mm-hmm.
without dreaming the dreams of growth and development and so on, and we live in a state of stagnation. Would you comment on that, please?
So we must always, when we use contemplation, it's our intelligence is working. Well, we have our mind that perceives everything through our senses, but then we also have our intelligence that, informs us better about what that object is. And according to our spiritual teachings, we're supposed to use the intelligence to see whether this particular item or activity or experience or person or behavior, is that something that's beneficial as a spirit soul, or is it detrimental? So that type of contemplation where one thinks that, in terms of spiritual perspective and spiritual goals, how does this align with that? And one thinks that, okay, this is something favorable, like if you're all here in the temple, so you're getting some regulated dose of where there's some, sacred sound, sacred wisdom, we have the deities here, we have association, positive association. So these are activities where we can accept. But those activities that lead us through, very negative experience or negative spiritual experience, that we can reject. So one of our teachers, Bhaktivinoda Thakur, says, you accept that which is favorable in discharging devotional service. And then you firmly reject that which is unfavorable in the perspective of devotional service. So this requires that contemplation, where one contemplates and analyzes how this activity is favorable. To your second point about stagnation, This is what Prabhupada was very much against, in the sense that there are some spiritualists who think that, okay, well, I'm just going to be in my monastery or in the confines of the temple or the home, and I'm not doing anything for humanity or not doing anything for, people around me. But in Krishna consciousness, we see that we very much care about people of all backgrounds, all ages, all walks of life. So an example of this is, for example, when we have our Sunday programs, we ensure that not only people get the wisdom, the chanting, the worship, but also people get to have sacred food. And anybody is welcome to come and participate. And this is one sense where we are taking food that is cooked specially in accordance with Krishna's injunctions. We offer it to Krishna to make sure that it gets free from karma, and we distribute that food to others. So when we distribute that food, it's not just ordinary nourishment that they attain, but it's also they get free from karma, in partaking that. So those are some ways in which we engage in service to others, and we do this sometimes in a big way, where we distribute food in festivals that are outdoors, or we have programs at home, or we have programs in the temple and so forth. So stagnation is something that we don't really propound. We focus on our internal regulator activities, and at the same time we focus on the outreach. Both are important. Not that we just simply are chanting at home and chanting in the temple and not doing anything for serving humanity, but we serve humanity with Krishna related or Krishna conscious items. So for example, we focus on wisdom, we focus on sacred food, sacred sound, and this we have seen that it's uplifted people from being very materialistically conscious to more spiritually and Krishna conscious. Does that answer your question? Yes, Hare Krishna. That's a very important question, that we are not stagnant. When sometimes spiritualists get a bad rap, saying that, oh, you spiritualists are just simply chanting and worshiping and waving incense. Well, how does this help others? Well, it helps others in also this perspective, that your particular regulation that you have as a Bhakti Yoga Krishna conscious practitioner helps you to be a very well trained person, so that when you're out in society, you know how to behave, you know how to act with others, and you know how to obviously not commit crimes and break the law, that kind of stuff. Prabhupada said that, we are taking people who are, engaged in all sorts of materialistic activities, sense enjoyment, and we're turning them into first-class men and women, right, in society, where you'll be proud of having that. And in fact, I can share from my workplace that at a conference I was attending, there was one of my coworkers said that, the behavior that I have is, I'm very well trained. Right? And maybe since your upbringing might be like that. But I encounter so many people who are maybe 50, 60, 70 years old, who are not very well trained. They give all sorts of lewd comments, they're rude, they're arrogant. So I attribute that sort of compliment towards my spiritual practice. Because the spiritual practice is from which, you can really launch out to the world and really share Krishna consciousness. Without the spiritual practice, it doesn't give you that training and background. So, yes, question.
Hare Krishna, Prabhu.
Hare Krishna.
You were mentioning that you'll have a higher taste for Krishna when doing certain things, but people they chant, they come to the temple, and this, like when you're trying to wake up early morning for Mangala Arati, but you're like, oh, you hit the snooze button sometime and you're feeling tired and you fall asleep, and your taste for the higher taste of Krishna doesn't increase too much. Like, what are some things that can help with, like, the laziness or lethargicness and things like that? And you're always, distracted by certain things, such as your phone or some stuff like that. The material stuff is always coming at you.
Okay. So everybody, the question is that the question is about higher taste. How do we get higher taste, spiritual taste? And especially when we're thinking of, we wake up early in the morning, or we, staying away from our phones, how do we gain that higher taste and, solidifying that higher taste really over time? So it's a good question. So this is something that you can perceive in your life. For example, if you get a good night's sleep, and you wake up in the morning early, you find that when you engage in your morning practices, you have a whole day for you, right? But if you were to sleep in and think that, okay, I'm just going to put the snooze button and sleep until 9, 10, 11 o'clock, you find half your day is gone. So I'm just saying, from just a simply practical perspective, what to speak of, more of a Krishna conscious perspective, just a practical perspective, you see half your day is gone. Then you realize that the quality of sleep I have is not very good. The best quality of sleep you have is how God has, or Krishna has destined this whole place, is at night we should be sleeping, and that quality of sleep we get from say 9 p.m. to say 3 a.m. is really good quality sleep. But the sleep we get from say 6 a.m. to 9 or 10 a.m. is not very good quality sleep. So normally we should sleep, but we should sleep at the right hours. And in doing so, we find more benefit from that. So not only are we more restful, but we're more productive in the day in terms of, okay, well, I have some service to do, or some sort of engagement I have to engage in. That happens with that discipline. So what I see is a lot of people have that discipline, but they have a discipline for their vocation, for their job. They'll wake up early, they'll commute an hour, hour and a half, and come back. But then the same thing, if it's being asked for spiritual reasoning, there's a lot of excuses that come out. But when thinking that the job or vocation you have is not permanent, like if you fall sick, it's not like your boss is going to come to you and give you soup and give you some nice calming words. It's not going to be there. So therefore, we should realize that our heart should remain with Krishna, not with our work or getting very politically active, right? It's not going to give us true happiness. So we should realize that, what am I doing for Krishna? So it's important to have goals. So if you have spirituality as your number one goal of your life, then naturally you want to engage yourself in that goal. And how am I serving that goal? And if I realize that, okay, if it's not sustainable for me to wake up at 3 a.m. in the morning, at least, let me do 5 a.m., a little bit earlier than what I used to do. Because sometimes we swing, okay, I used to wake up at 10 a.m. and I'm going to swing to 3 a.m. It's not going to work very well sustainably. You have to take baby steps and realize that, wow, living a lifestyle which is more in sattvic consciousness, because your quality of your meditation is also better in the morning. So not only you get better quality sleep, so now we talk about the spiritual things, your quality of japa, meditation, gets better. And then you have a whole day, a whole weekend to yourself to actually really do what you want to do. Whether it's even, recreation, or you want to spend time with family, or you want to engage in service of the Lord, you have more time. So that higher taste comes from the perspective of, you live a healthy life, you perceive that you are able to go deeper and make progress in your own self, your own goals. And when you see those markers, you're making good progress against them, you naturally gain a taste to a perspective where you'll never want to sleep in, or you never want to hit the snooze button, and you want to just engage in spiritual service. And when you have that higher taste, the lower taste and the taste for that goes away. And I give you a kind of a materialistic example. A material example is when you have an athlete who's training very hard, right? And if they were to eat a lot of junk food, a lot of sugary drinks, it completely combats whatever hard work they did. So they gain a higher taste over time for eating low-fat foods, avoiding sugar, so forth, right? That's just a material example. So similarly, in a higher taste, when we engage in, eating prasadam, when we engage in reading spiritual literature, when we engage in chanting, that gives us true benefit and free from anxiety. Otherwise, what's the ramifications? We're always stressed out and we're always anxious. We are thinking about, if we don't think about Krishna, we'll think about some, office politics. right? All these things will just give us more and more misery. So it's like it's better to not leave our heart with these types of temporary things, because ultimately Krishna is permanent. So we realize Krishna is a permanent, I am permanent. These are my goals, spiritual goals. What am I doing to engage in the spiritual goals? And not only that, what am I doing 6 months from now that ensures that I'm going to actually improve upon this? Where was I 6 months ago? Where was I 6 months? Where will I be 6 months from now? Where am I today? We must always think and analyze, otherwise we just become stagnant even in spiritual life. And when we become stagnant in spiritual life, the material energy can just suck us away, just like I have the bottle and the gravity just pulls it down. So we are trying to always endeavor and constantly fight these three modes of material nature, because that's just the situation we're in. Alright, so that's enough for questions. It's noon. So those of you who got Bhagavad Gitas, if you can put it on the shelf, and all rise for the noon service. And if you have any questions, further questions, maybe during Prasadam, maybe those of you who are not brave to ask questions in front of everybody, we can do that over Prasadam, which is 1.5 hours. So, Hare Krishna.
Shri Rama Gopi Vallabh ki jai. Jai Prabhupada ki jai.